Oh, well, I think the best introduction to this section is this short uh, folk song. It's good to get up in the morning. It's good to be honest and true. And it's good to be off with the old love before you're on with the new. So at the beginning of chapter 25, we're in the thick of the story and have met all the characters. Our hero, if he is such, Harry Clavering, has had his heart broken and has then mended it by becoming engaged to another girl who is less beautiful but more worthy. He's got himself into hot water, however, by renewing his acquaintance with the beautiful Julia Brabazon, now the widowed Lady Ongar, and forgetting to mention that he was no longer a free man. Harry's sister, Fanny, has realised that she is in love with the faithful, dutiful, but hopelessly poor curate, Mr. Saul. Harry's cousin Archie has started his efforts to make Julia his wife, using the dubious advice of his chum Captain Boodle and the even more unreliable assistance of Sophie Gordeloup. So that's a love situation, but there's a much darker strain too with the death of the young Hugh Clavering. To Sir Hugh, the main issue is that he has lost his heir, but to his neglected wife Hermione, the loss is of her beloved son and one surviving child. Hugh has gone straight back to London with his brother, leaving his wife to grieve alone in her gloomy house and without the comfort of her sister's presence. It seems to me that these various strands can be seen as falling into one of three headings: perfidy, persistence, and power. Who is faithful and who deceives? Who holds the power? Do the men have it all their own way, as might too easily be assumed in these pre-feminist times? Who, in a quiet way, is persistent and true? So part one, which is sadly the largest part, is perfidy. I wonder if Harry had read The Small House at Allington, which was written during 1862 to 63, so just 3 years before the Claverings. Had he done so, he might have been more wary of getting engaged to one girl and then to another whom he had known before. And yet he did know that he was wrong. He was not so weak a villain as Mr. Crosby, and nor, to do her justice, was Julia an arch manipulator like Lady Alexandrina de Courcy. Harry seems much younger and more naive than Crosby, and knew that he had got himself into an unintended muddle, and Julia had not known about Florence when she let Harry kiss her. And yet, our first chapter opens with Harry having to confess to Julia that he was engaged. And not only that, but that he had failed to tell her, so that she found out through the unattractive medium of Captain Clavering and Sophie Gordeloup. Julia gives him the opportunity to leave her, but he, poor fool, fails to take it and ends up getting himself even deeper in by asking her to marry him. Like Crosby, he realizes that going back on his engagement and marrying a woman for wealth and or rank will mark him out as a mercenary villain. But unlike Crosby, he can tell himself that he is actually being true to his first love and is acting nobly. Chapter 26 continues the theme, with Harry continuing to ignore Florence and her letters, and some rumour of his possible faithlessness finding its way back to Stratton and Florence's parents, although not to Florence herself. I would also like to point out that Harry's lackadaisical attitude to his work borders on perfidious. How he got away with it astonishes me. His projected brother-in-law, Theodore Burton, is kindness and generosity itself, both as regards the work and Florence. He gives Harry every chance to run straight and true, and to his credit, Harry responds by asking if he may visit Theodore at home and tell him everything. So let's carry on dealing with Harry's perfidy by skipping to chapter 28 and his conversation with Cecilia Burton. I wonder if she's the real heroine of this novel. She's certainly an attractive character, honest, loving, and generous, or at any rate, generous to everyone except Julia Ongar, whom she views as the Scarlet Woman. She nearly succeeds in getting Harry to admit that he will not desert Florence, but not quite. The story of Harry's perfidy must go on a little longer. So, by chapter 31, Harry is still prevaricating and procrastinating, trying to keep both of his engagements and desperately trying to do the right thing without allowing himself to acknowledge what that is. His letter to Cecilia Burton sets out his dilemma very clearly. Of Julia, when she returned to me, when I found that in spite of her faults, she had loved me through it all, I yielded and became false and a traitor. Of Florence, I know well that Florence is far the nobler woman of the two. Florence could never have done what she did. The man who marries Florence must be happy, if any woman can make a man happy. Dear Cecilia is still pleading for Harry and is convinced that Florence should come up to London so that everything can be put right. Theodore is not convinced. Can you believe any good of a man who tells you to your face that he is engaged to two women at once? I think I can, she says. In the next chapter, 32, Florence arrives in London and learns the truth. I can't help thinking that she behaves almost too well, although she's not quite a Dickensian heroine, I'm glad to say. She does show spirit and behaves like a true Burton child by facing up to her grief and shaking herself down. She also packs up a packet of all Harry's letters and little presents, and in doing so, finds her picture on many a Trollope Society poster. She expects that Cecilia will see Harry the next day, but a letter from Mrs. Clavering arrives that explains that Harry is ill and won't return to London until the following week. Despite Mr. Burton's gloomy and hostile view of Harry, Cecilia still hopes and plans, and she sees the delay as a means of possibly bringing this perfidy to an end. But we have to wait until chapter 37 and our next meeting to find out how Harry resolves his sorry tale. Is Harry the only perfidious person in this book? Alas, no. Please don't forget that potential Russian spy, Sophie Gordeloup. Is she honest and straightforward? Of course not. She greets her guests in a dirty wrapper, and slovenliness is a sure sign of poor morals in a Trollope story. Also, let's remember that the Crimean War, a desperate conflict against Russian expansionism, had ended around 10 years before, and Europe was very concerned about the balance of power, so being a Russian spy was a serious business. It is Sophie who, with great delight, tells Julia about Florence, and Sophie who realizes that she could both sell her services to a lover and keep Julia from marrying so that she can keep milking her friendship for her own profit. And so, in chapter 27, we find Sophie playing her game when her brother, Count Pateroff, writes to Julia urging her to marry him. The Count's no saint either. Perfidy and deception is an open book to him, and he writes to Julia with a made-up story about Lord Ongar's dying wishes. The brother and sister also cheat each other. The Count wants Sophie's support to be his scheme, and Sophie pretends that he has it, while having no intention of furthering his suit. Nevertheless, when Julia takes her to the Isle of Wight for a few days, she tells Count Pateroff where Julia is, and so the Count interrupts Julia on her solitary walk across what we now call Tennyson Down. He threatens her with marriage or scandal. Hardly an attractive proposal. By chapter 29, Julia is back at her hotel and confronting Sophie, being convinced that she had a hand in the Count's game. In fact, Sophie hadn't been part of this and would have preferred the Count to have stayed away, but she had, of course, played a double game by accepting money from him to tell him where Sophie was. Even the brother and sister can't trust each other. Julia can't bear to stay with Sophie any longer and sees her suspected perfidy as the perfect opportunity to break the connection. The two ladies return to London early, at no expense, and through some clever manipulation, some little increase of income to Sophie. Chapter 30 is a bit of light relief. Captain Boodle and Archie are like the true Dromios, or perhaps Sir Toby Belch and Sir Andrew Aguecheek, providing us with some fun amid the more serious business of perfidy. Is Archie perfidious? Well, yes, in that he clearly only wants to marry Julia for her money, but he's so transparent in this desire that he can deceive no one. His chum, Captain Boodle, has no illusions on this front, but has begun to suspect Sophie, since nothing has come of the £70 she has received. He goes to confront her and meets more than his match in this arch manipulator. He has two comforts, however. He didn't give her any money, and he can tell the tale of their meeting as a triumph of his skill. Sophie may have pocketed £70 during this transaction, but her power over Archie is finished. So theme 2 is persistence. And while these stirring events were taking place in London and Freshwater, another tale was unfolding at Clavering, and we rejoin them at chapter 33. Mr. Saul had again asked Fanny to marry him and was continuing to meet her on Cumberly Lane, and Fanny was beginning to realise that she did love him. He was in no doubt. You are my alpha and omega, my first and last, my beginning and end, my everything, my all. While they both recognise that they can't marry on his income, Fanny and Mr. Saul are now committed to each other, and Fanny confesses as much to her mother. Mr. Saul goes to see the rector and is very firm that he will not give up his love for Fanny. There is an absolute breach between the two men. Mr. Saul is forbidden the house and told that he must leave the parish. Mrs. Clavering sends for Harry in the hope that he will sort things out in some way. So in the next chapter, Harry returns home and goes to confront Mr. Saul in his incommodious lodging, telling him that the engagement is impossible because of the financial situation. Harry has expressed to his mother his horror at the engagement. I can't conceive how a man could do such a wicked thing. It's treachery of the worst sort, and coming from a clergyman is, of course, the more to be condemned. Harry was moralising, rather forgetting his own perfidy. He has worked himself up into a fine fervour before meeting Mr. Saul, who, however, impervious to his anger, stands his ground. I love Mr. Saul's unflappable nature. He neither gets cross, nor does he lose an inch of his ground. He states he will not give up his love for Fanny, but will not instigate her to disobedience. He will be persistent in a quiet, determined way, and he agrees to leave his job in 2 months' time. What a contrast to Harry's impetuous and vacillating nature. But wait, this chapter, which is 34 in case you've lost count, ends with Harry becoming ill, really ill, with a fever and everything, and so he has to stay at home in bed. His mother writes to Cecilia Burton to explain why he won't be in Onslow Square, and during her conversation with Harry, he explains that he has got involved with Julia Ongar. This gives his mother the opportunity to say, "My darling, you will be true to Florence, will you not? My own Harry, tell me that you will be true where your truth is due. I will, mother. My own boy, my darling boy, my own true gentleman. Harry felt he didn't deserve the praise, but praise undeserved, though it may be satire in disguise, is often very useful. Does this mean that Harry will turn from perfidy to persistence after all? So now we move on to the theme of power. There are many different types of power exhibited in this novel, but in the next chapter, 35, we see one of the cruelest forms, that of meanness and indifference. Hugh Clavering has returned from London, still within a few weeks of his son's death, to announce to his wife that he is going to go fishing in Norway for 4 months. Harry is shocked when he hears this. Jack Stewart's yacht is only a riverboat or just big enough for Cowes Harbour, nothing more. Harry and his parents discuss the cruelty of Hugh's behaviour to Hermione, and we are made privy to the way in which he had told the news to his wife. He took, I think, a delight in being thus over-harsh in his hardness to her. He intended to do as he liked now and always, and he intended that his wife should know that such was his intention. Hermie is distraught. For some reason, she still loves Hugh, and although she was timid, she decides to try to make a stand against his cruelty in deserting her. I cannot believe it, Hugh. I cannot bring myself to think that you will be so cruel. In response, the next day, Hugh suggests that Julia should be asked to stay, but Hermione realises that she will probably not come after the way in which Hugh had treated her. So Hugh then offers Moor Park as an alternative place for Hermie to go, which is as good as trying to persuade her to be in a Gothic novel. He leaves her with no softness and all his power of doing just what he liked, even though a friend had written to warn him about the yacht. Feeling that she contributed nothing to his life. He certainly had all the power in that marriage for his whole life. And what of Archie? He was a younger son with little money and seemingly little power. But he did have the power of asking a woman to marry him. And if he succeeded, he would have full power over her fortune. He knew this and told both Hugh and his friend Boodle in our concluding chapter today that he was going to give it another shot by asking Julia himself. He decides that his best option is to point out that he is now the heir to Clavering. Of course, Julia rejects the proposal, the power that a woman has in this situation, and she exerts a little more power by asking that he will promise not to ask her again on pain of being refused admittance to her house. What can Archie do but agree and part friends, with the consolation of a yachting trip instead of marriage preparation? There are so many more discussions to be had about power. Julia Ongar had been left in a powerless position because her husband had unkindly exercised his power over her right up to his death. By spreading false rumours, he had tainted her name and made it impossible for her to enjoy the benefits of being a wealthy widow. In Aeneid Book 4, Virgil describes rumour as running through cities, growing ever larger, having many watchful eyes, many tongues, many mouths, and many pricked up ears. This is what Lord Ongar had conjured up to ruin Julia, so that even when she goes to the Isle of Wight, a place notoriously always behind the rest of England, everyone knows that there is something shady about her, and even there she cannot be wholly at peace. what power Lord Ongar had, even in death. And Sophie Gordeloup exercised her power, using Julia's friendless position to enable her to be a leech, having her expenses paid for her and extorting presents of money. Her brother used the power of the past to try to frighten Julia, and perhaps, had she had a less determined character, he would have succeeded. Julia, however, had power of her own. She used the power of her anger to get rid of Sophie and was impervious to Sophie's efforts to get back when she wrote a begging letter full of false professions of love. She had the power within herself to get rid of both those leeches. She also, alas, had the power of her beauty and her past love to attach Harry. Did Harry have all the power in his relationship with Florence? He could renege on their engagement and go off with a more beautiful and much richer woman, but would he be happy? Remember rumour and her power to wound. Would he and Julia be received in society after such bad behaviour? The law was also open to Florence should she wish to pursue a breach of promise suit, although it is unlikely that she was that sort of girl. It took some brazen courage to go through that in court. But Florence and her family had power, the power of affection, truth, and honesty. And that may well prevail in Harry's case, as might the power of his mother's belief in him. And Mr. Saul had power, the power of honest love and faith, and the power of quiet determination, which, in turn, gave Fanny the power to stand up for herself and her love. So there we are. The Claverings are in some disarray. A disobedient daughter with an unsuitable lover, the head of the family going off to fish with the heir presumptive, while his wife mourns the death of his son and heir, and a son, the hero of the story, with 2 possible fiancés and no clear way out of his dilemma. And we've only got 12 chapters left to sort it all out. I have got some possible discussion questions, which is, where do you think the power rests between Florence and Harry? Is she simply the passive recipient of his decision, or has she power of her own? Is Lady Julia Ongar in any danger from the combined forces of Sophie Gordeloup and Count Pateroff? Has Harry any right to moralise over Mr. Saul's desire to engage himself to Fanny? With whom would you rather have dinner, Sophie or Fanny? Sorry, I didn't mean Fanny, I meant Sophie or Florence, but it doesn't matter. And would you go fishing in Norway in a rather small yacht? And that's it.